Exactly 1 week from today, voters in Iowa will hit the polls for the first stop in the 2024 Republican presidential contest. Donald Trump still holds a commanding lead in the polls. On Face the Nation yesterday, 2024 hopeful Ron DeSantis warned against making this election all about the former president.
If it's about, Donald Trump or his legal issues or criminal trials or all that stuff, I think it's going to be a really nasty election. I don't think that puts Republicans in a good position to win. So we need to have an election on the issues. We need a candidate that can win a clear-cut victory, and we need to start looking forward as a country.
All right, so for more, we are joined by CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small. Torian, it's good to see you. So let's just get down to this. Why has DeSantis struggled to narrow his gap between himself and Donald Trump?
So, Anne-Marie, partially because of that case that he's making. This is his closing argument that Donald Trump's legal challenges could present a bigger issue for the party in the general election. The problem is Trump supporters, the pool that he's looking to win over to build this strong support on caucus night, aren't interested in that argument. A lot of them told me at several Trump events over the weekend that they're not considering any candidate not named Trump in the running, and they don't consider his legal problems to be a big issue in this race. Take a listen to what they had to say.
I voted for him the other 2 times, so this wasn't even a consideration that I had to worry about. It was all decided a long time ago.
I'm just not looking at anybody. I just think he's the strongest leader that we could have to come back to our country and to bring us back to a more sanity in America.
Right before the new year, Ron DeSantis really ramped up rhetoric around the former president, really leaned into the fact that he's just not best fit to be the party's leader moving forward. This is also a similar argument, although to a lesser extent, that Vivek Ramaswamy is making. He is still a staunch supporter of the former president, but has said that he thinks that those legal challenges will catch up to him in this race.
Torian, as you know, over the weekend, former President Trump made remarks about the January 6th attack on the Capitol and called those in connection to the riot hostages. Can you talk about what else he said?
Yeah, so he certainly made a pattern or a habit of sympathizing with January 6 convicts. He said that they're being unfairly prosecuted and persecuted compared to, he mentioned, Antifa protesters for the BLM, Black Lives Matter protest over the summer. So he's been making that case on the trail. And I can say voters, again, tell me that those are the type of messages that really resonate with them. They believe that the president is being unfairly persecuted. They're calling his legal challenges a witch hunt, so they are right in line with what he's saying on the trail.
So what's a good outcome for Nikki Haley in Iowa? The polls indicate that she's probably not going to beat Donald Trump, but is, any increase in where her standings, will that be considered a win?
Yeah, so compared to her primary rival, she's really split her time between New Hampshire and Iowa, really going for a stronger finish in New Hampshire compared to Iowa, because polls show that Donald Trump still has a very commanding lead in the Hawkeye state. I talked to Republican leadership in the state who say that, Haley, although she isn't here as often, has a pretty sophisticated ground game. She's starting to pull ahead of expectations. So the idea here is if she doesn't finish in second, which many believe Ron DeSantis might, she might at least finish in third place.
All right, Torian Small, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We are just 1 week away from the Iowa caucuses. On January 15th, the first voters in the nation will get their say on who will represent the Republican Party in the general election. Former President Donald Trump is currently leading the Republican field in both the Hawkeye state and nationally. CBS News senior and White House political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Iowa. Ed, good to have you here. What are you hearing on the ground from Trump headquarters in Iowa?
Robert, with 1 week to go, there's no question that the former president is in the lead. At this point, it's just a question perhaps of by how much might he pull this off. He told supporters over the weekend, act like you were down by 1%. Don't believe those polls that say we're 35, 40 points ahead. He may have a point, and it's probably a good thing to be telling people with a week to go, because you don't want them to get complacent. But he's got plenty of people helping him out. We've met some of them in recent days. Let's start with a guy named Gary Loeffler, well known across the state to Republicans, somebody who's been showing up to Trump events since 2016 with his red tractor, someone who ran for Congress after Trump was elected and lost, and someone who showed up at the January 6th events in Washington, though he says he didn't go to the U.S. Capitol. We talked to him about his decision to become a caucus captain for the former president on caucus night. Take a listen.
Basically, as a caucus captain, you're going to give the 5-minute speech because all the candidates, if they have a captain there or they have a supporter there, they'll be able to give a 5-minute speech, kind of like you're in the bottom of the ninth and we're on the final coming around, right? I mean, hey, can they get the ball across the goal line type of mentality, right? Yeah. And so that's that last 5 minutes that someone that's maybe sitting there undecided, still sitting on that fence and goes, you know what? I like what that guy said. I'm gonna write Trump's name in.
So you got to be the closer.
Yeah, we're the closer. Yes, we're that high-paid relief pitcher in the bottom of the ninth.
But you've also got to be someone who puts butts in the seats, right?
Right.
That's part of the job as well.
Yeah, like we're calling people. We're trying to get more people to come to the precinct caucus. So we're that cowboy out the rodeo. We're trying to round them up.
You get the point. Basically, he is one of what are potentially up to 1,600 caucus captains the former president needs at these individual caucuses that are held all across this tiny state, with just a handful of Republicans in each one. Loeffler is also part of a handful of people who are spending time at Trump campaign headquarters in these closing days, trying to find those people to turn out. And again, you may think to yourself, well, isn't this what every campaign does? Yeah, but Donald Trump didn't do this back in 2016, and it's part of why he lost. Here, listen to a woman named Angela, but first another guy named John Goodrich, who's been with the former president as well since 2016, and provides a little perspective. What's the biggest difference you notice in his operation from when he first ran to this time?
They didn't have much of a ground game. This was not going on when he ran in 2016. Now he's got a much stronger ground game.
So what you're telling me is they're taking this a lot more seriously and studiously than they did back in 2016.
Well, they understand what a caucus is. It's not just walk in and vote. It's a neighborhood get-together, and it is truly grassroots. And the caucus process is all volunteer, county by county, precinct by precinct. And you have to contact your precinct voters because turnout is the key.
So what are they asking you to do tonight?
So I'm making phone calls. There's so many people on here. I've been calling in my precinct, so I have a list of about 400 people in my local precinct, and getting them to commit to caucus for President Trump on that night.
The goal is to bring at least 10 people with you.
Right.
So what does the bell mean?
When you get somebody to commit to caucus. Yep.
So that's been going off a few times.
Yeah.
So that's not a guarantee they're going to show up. They're at least telling you guys we'll be there.
Right.
Okay.
And so every time you hear a bell, it's someone who has committed. They say, I'm going to come to caucus, and I'm going to support President Trump. So occasionally we'll have a few people that will say, I plan on attending caucus, and I'm undecided. And I said, that's fantastic, especially if they're my precinct. I said, I hope I can persuade you by what I have to say. So that's the point.
Now you're just rubbing it in.
These young workers are intense, and they're competitive.
Have you found your 10?
I have 30.
You have 30?
Yep.
Okay.
30, and I'm not done. I'm going to keep calling.
So you get the idea. Again, this may seem typical in other states, Bob, but as you know, you've got to be able to go that surgical, precinct by precinct, county by county, street by street, to find every single registered Republican. 8 years ago, Donald Trump thought it was just about crowd size and big arena-style rallies, and he lost to Ted Cruz.
Ed.
The Trump team, and the DeSantis team would argue Nikki Haley is coming in too late to try to do what they've been up to for months. Now we've seen how the former president's doing it.
Ed, let's step back for a second. You've been on the ground in Iowa, and it's fascinating to see the operation for the Trump campaign. But you talked to someone who participated in January 6th. They said they didn't enter the Capitol, but they were nearby the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Yep. You have the former president out there in speech after speech calling those who have been indicted or imprisoned related to January 6 offenses or allegations are, quote, hostages. You have his rhetoric against President Biden escalating by the day with threatening to indict and go after President Biden should Trump win the White House again. Are those issues, those statements, and Trump's legal challenges, which will come again to the fore this week, at all on the mind of Iowa Republicans?
They agree with the former president, many of them do, including Loeffler, that if you were a nonviolent participant in the January 6th insurrection, they should be pardoned. How would you define nonviolent? If you've been charged with something, then clearly you probably did something wrong. Unclear. But they hear him and they agree with him. On the issue of going after the Biden administration, they generally agree with that as well. And those are among his supporters. You talk to Republicans with supporting the other candidates, and they make arguments similar to DeSantis and Haley, that he may not be the best person to win a general election campaign for all those reasons you just listed. And yet, despite their consistent warnings, DeSantis and Haley's, they don't appear to be getting close enough to him to win next week unless there's some organizational fluke we haven't been able to pick up on after weeks and months of having personnel here. So, you know, there's a reason he continues to say what he says this weekend, suggesting that they should be pardoned and calling on the president to do so, which he has signaled he would not do. It's because when he does it, he finds agreement, and it only sustains his support. And for the legal matters, as one woman said to me on Friday, Bob, the more they try to make him into a martyr, the more followers he draws. Is in essence what many of these people believe, that all of these federal and state cases against him, the civil case in New York, are only going to help him because they believe Americans ultimately will come to his side, believing that he's being unfairly targeted.
And Ed, quickly, you've been covering Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on the ground. He's put such an emphasis on Iowa. What's his chance right now of coming in a strong second to Trump?
I still think there's a good chance he comes in a strong second because what he has been doing, what Trump demonstrated, his team demonstrated to us over the weekend, his team has been doing that since the spring. It's been his super PAC, Never Back Down, this group that basically has not only done all that work, but transported him across the state because he dumped all of his political money into this super PAC to allow it to happen. But they've been doing that spade work as well. And so when we spoke with him over the weekend, he continues to signal, I understand that in this state you have to do it methodically, surgically, find people door to door. And my team has been doing that. Therefore, I think that we're going to do better than the media, the pundits would believe. Based on our observations, yes, they have a formidable team here. Veteran operatives and observers agree they have done good work and the kind of work that needs to be done to perform well. And he says he's got more than 1,500 precinct captains for those roughly 1,600 precincts across the state. That would signal a serious operation as well. It's just a matter of who can turn out enough people a week from tonight, Bob, when temperatures are expected to be somewhere close to 7 degrees, the coldest in modern history for a caucus.
Iowans and most Americans don't want to do political activity in that kind of weather, but they're certainly getting motivated to come out, at least in some quarters, as you've been covering, Ed. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for your reporting.
An appeals court in Washington is weighing former President Donald Trump's claim he is shielded from federal prosecution. Trump is arguing he is immune from prosecution because the actions he's accused of happened while he was in the White House. Federal prosecutors and the former president's lawyers made their cases this morning.
To authorize the prosecution of a president for his official acts would open a Pandora's box from which this nation may never recover.
The president has a unique constitutional role, but he is not above the law. Separation of powers principles, constitutional text, history, precedent, and other immunity doctrines all point to the conclusion that a former president enjoys no immunity from criminal prosecution.
Special counsel Jack Smith has charged former President Trump with 4 criminal counts stemming from an alleged scheme to overturn the 2020 election. Trump has pleaded not guilty to all charges. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. So, Scott, tell us about how the former president acted in court. What did you see?
And the former president came in here moments before the hearing began and left moments later out of an underground secured garage. He didn't spend a whole lot of time here at the courthouse, but he was there in the room, sitting and listening, and it's quite likely, Elaine, certainly a possibility, that his presence may have impacted some of the tenor and the words chosen by his attorney in this case, John Sauer. As part of his arguments and part of his responses to the court, Trump's attorney, Sauer, made references to President Biden's handling of the border, former President Clinton's handling of presidential pardons, called Donald Trump the clear leader in all the polls. The type of rhetoric, the type of political arguments Trump's been making on the stump were synthesized into the arguments today, Elaine, by his lawyers before this three-judge panel.
Interesting. So is that perhaps, do we have an idea of why the former president opted to appear in court today?
It was voluntary. He was under no mandate to be here, but perhaps it's no coincidence that roughly 45 to 60 minutes after the hearing wrapped, the former president spoke before cameras nearby, in essence, potentially speaking to his voters or future supporters. This really was a striking hearing in its tenor, in some of the language used. It went about an hour and 15 minutes. Three judges on this appeals court hearing arguments over whether Trump is shielded by and enjoys presidential immunity, that he can't be prosecuted for election conspiracy for acts taken while he was in office. The questions the judges asked and the language they used were so striking in the word choice and in the tenor. One judge asked Trump's lawyer if a future president could order a SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his chief political rival, if a future president could sell pardons if presidential immunity exists. And the answers were not so clear-cut to those questions. That's part of what these judges are grappling with, Elaine, is what is presidential immunity? Does it exist if there are official acts that are the center of allegations?
Scott, let me ask you about something you said a moment ago, is that there was sort of a political undercurrent infused with some of the legal arguments that we heard from the lawyers today. I'm wondering, is it likely that we will hear the former president use this appearance and other legal challenges that he's facing as part of what we will hear on the campaign trail moving forward?
The timing's noteworthy, isn't it? Less than a week till the Iowa caucuses, and the former president was not in Iowa. He was here, though he was under no responsibility or requirement to be here, at the courthouse. He had no speaking role today. It's appellate court. The parties very infrequently will show up for appellate arguments in their cases. So it certainly begs the question, is this a political tool? Is this a political means for the former president to garner more support? But Elaine, ultimately, this hearing was, relatively speaking, bare bones. An hour and 15 minutes, almost exactly what they forecast. It was nimble, it was quick. The judges pressed with questions. They didn't hear a lot of unsolicited arguments. And the clear issue is, when will they rule? When will they determine if this goes back to the trial judge and back to trial date of March 4th? They don't say when they're going to rule. Could be quick, could take weeks, could push back that date.
All right, Scott MacFarlane, one of many reporters, as we can hear in the background there, covering this very high-profile case. Scott, thank you so much. And Jessica Levinson joins us now for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor for Loyola Law School in California. Jessica, can you explain the legal basis for the concept of presidential immunity?
Absolutely. And great reporting from Scott. This was a pretty quick hearing, and they really did focus in on what you just asked me about. What is presidential immunity? So it is this thing that was created by judges. It is a doctrine which says that presidents are not like the rest of us. It says that presidents are entitled to some protection when it comes to their ability to function and their ability to do their job. And so what the doctrine of presidential immunity essentially says is that we want presidents to be able to make decisions without fear that they will constantly face civil suits, for instance. We want presidents to be able to have open and transparent discussions with their high-level advisors without fear that that information could be subpoenaed and could expose them to embarrassment. But it doesn't say, in my view, and none of the precedent says, that presidents are absolutely immune from criminal prosecution. That would mean that the criminal justice system simply doesn't apply to presidents based on actions they took while in office.
Well, how did federal prosecutors counter Trump's claims that he should be shielded from prosecution?
So federal prosecutors, I think, pointed out that the reasons that we have presidential immunity don't apply here. And they also were able to respond to some hypotheticals I think were very harmful for Trump's arguments. For instance, and Scott mentioned this, there was a hypothetical about, for instance, what if a president said, we should assassinate my political opponent? Can it be that that person would escape liability? What if a president said, we should trump up voter fraud? I'm coming up with another hypothetical. Can it be that that president would escape liability? So what I think the Department of Justice did in an effective way is they were able to point out, if this is really what you're claiming, if you're really claiming that presidents escape from any sort of repercussions in the criminal justice system, what about this? What about that? And I think what you saw is a 3-judge panel very skeptical of granting all of the Trump team's requests here.
Well, how could the outcome of this case impact other cases against Donald Trump?
So this is a case that's really focused on whether or not the president can face repercussions for actions he took while in office. So we're looking at the federal election interference case. We're also looking at the Georgia election interference case. Here's what we're not looking at. We're not looking at the federal case dealing with the alleged unlawful retention of documents in Mar-a-Lago. We're not looking at the civil fraud case against him. We're not looking at any cases that deal clearly with acts that were either not official acts or actions that were taken after the president left the presidency, after January 6, 2021.
All right, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, thank you.
Republican presidential candidates have just 1 week to convince voters in Iowa to support them. With just 6 days to go into the first of the nation caucuses, former President Donald Trump was not out on the campaign trail today. Instead, he was in the courtroom, attending a hearing on his claim of presidential immunity in the 2020 election case. The Republican frontrunner holds a commanding lead in the Hawkeye state, and that's according to a CBS News recent poll. We have Scott McFarland and Ed O'Keefe joining us now. Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent, and Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent joining us inside in Iowa. But Scott, I want to begin with you. And I think it's really telling that we have you and Ed here, because this is kind of a preview of what we're going to see this campaign. Trump in the courtroom while also campaigning for the presidency. His team today, you were there, trying to make this argument that the president at the time was immune, should be immune from prosecution. What was the case that his lawyers were trying to make, and how did the judges respond?
An hour and 15 minutes of arguments, and throughout, you get the sense from the 3 judges on the appeals court, they're skeptical. They're dubious about what they heard from Trump's lawyer. He's making this multifaceted argument that he's shielded from prosecution in the election conspiracy case because he was the president doing official acts when the alleged crimes occurred. And he also made this argument that it would be a double jeopardy case for the former president because he was impeached but acquitted by the Senate, so he can't be criminally prosecuted for that reason. Right from the jump, Caitlin, the 3 judges pressed right into the heart of that argument, spent most of their time questioning Trump's lawyers. Before I explain where they went with it, let's take a listen to some of the exchanges in court from earlier today.
To authorize the prosecution of a president for his official acts would open a Pandora's box from which this nation may never recover.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws.
Never before has there been allegations that a sitting president has, with private individuals and using the levers of power, sought to fundamentally subvert the democratic republic and the electoral system. And frankly, if that kind of fact pattern arises again, I think it would be awfully scary if there weren't some sort of mechanism by which to reach that criminally.
This sets up two big moments in the courtroom today. First of all, the judges made this, through their questioning, a prominent point. If Trump's lawyer is arguing he can only be prosecuted if he's convicted in an impeachment by the Senate, then they're contradicting their argument he can't be prosecuted at all. Kind of diminishes the idea of immunity. But more so, one of the judges, Florence Pan, new to the court, a Biden appointee, really pressed Trump's lawyers, saying, if you have presidential immunity, what do we make of a future president selling pardons? A future president ordering a SEAL team to assassinate his political opponent? And Trump's lawyer equivocated in the responses, going back to that old he's got to be impeached first issue. That's what the court's going to grapple with as they make their decision.
Any sort of sense of timeline? Is this something that can drag on? Both sides can appeal whatever the decision is.
The appeals courts are notoriously mercurial about their timetables. They rarely announce them, nor is there a deadline for this. They kind of set up the arguments promptly. They've moved swiftly to this point, which could indicate a swift ruling. But your point's, I think, the more prominent one. Whoever loses is going to appeal to the full appeals court, likely to the Supreme Court. All of that cannibalizes time. And with a March 4th trial date on the calendar, that's looking dubious. It may be pushed back well into 2024.
So it continues, and we will follow your reporting as it does. Scott MacFarlane, as always, thank you. Ed, I want to go to you, senior White House and political correspondent in Iowa, inside from a big snowstorm happening there. Good to see you, nice and warm, hopefully. So I do want to talk a little bit about this dynamic, how we're going to see kind of this split screen, Trump in the courtroom while also, trying to campaign, and in many ways the courtroom being the campaign. I know you've been on the ground for several days talking to voters there. Our polls show the former president has a real commanding lead. You've been reporting on a robust ground game and targeted effort that he has. But what are voters telling you about, how they feel about these cases? Are they in fact helping him?
Well, first of all, it is great to see you back, and we just can't do this without you. So I'm glad you're back in the saddle. I know you're going to be out on the road soon. So welcome back. Out here in Iowa, Caitlin, I think what we picked on today, at least, is a little more skepticism about these surveys, these polls that show the former president with such a commanding double-digit lead. This is something I picked up on over the summer, and I think some of our other colleagues have heard as well, and I heard it again today. This idea that when someone's calling your house or calling your cell phone and saying who you're voting for, there's a skepticism about who exactly is on the other end of the line. And so there may be Republicans in this state who are going to say Trump out of concern that it might be somebody who is not a pollster. Incredible to think that that is a potential wrinkle here, but it could be. And we're not going to know until next Monday night, really, how big his advantage was. What we saw today is Nikki Haley holding the only really big event that she's done since she got here over the weekend, because one she was supposed to do yesterday when the snow was beginning was canceled. Today she really had no choice but to do it. There were a handful of people there, and we found the Republicans who are skeptical of whether former President Trump can be the party's nominee when he's dealing with all the things you and Scott were just talking about. Take a listen to this voter, for example, who raised some of those concerns.
I voted for him last time, but there's so many issues with him right now. Is he electable? He's polarized the country quite a bit more than I think than the other two candidates. And then the issues is he going to be able to run? All the criminal probes and things going on.
So as Bob Rawlings said, there's concern that he has that Trump may not be the one, and so he's trying to decide between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. There were others at that event who said the same. They get their chance to do that tomorrow night in a comparison shopping debate that the two will be holding at the same time that the former president will come back here to Iowa after his various court dates and hold his own separate town hall on another network. So voters here and across the country, in essence, will get a chance to sample them in a slightly more specific way. And it suggests that there is still a decent chunk of Republicans who have not made up their mind and who are still trying to decide if there's someone who's not inclined to support the former president.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, too, about how, these voters are there meeting these candidates face to face, and there is potentially a chance for some kind of surprise. I'm curious too, because I know you were at Nikki Haley's event today, but you've also spent a good amount of time covering DeSantis, and I'm curious if you've seen anything on the ground that kind of may negate some of the polling that we've seen showing Trump with a commanding lead, and if DeSantis is going after Trump in any more strategic ways.
So the thing that people have to remember everywhere else is the way you win a caucus is precinct by precinct, strategic, surgical almost, in where you find the voter that might be interested in you. Trump's been doing it for a while. DeSantis' super PAC, that never back down organization, has been doing it for longer, since last spring. What Haley doesn't have in terms of that, she does have in terms of outside support now from the group called Americans for Prosperity. Very well-known, ground operation, conservative organization that has tentacles all across the country, but especially here in Iowa. And you talk to people, they say, yes, I've been hearing from the DeSantis people. I've been hearing from the Trump people. I've been hearing from Americans for Prosperity on Haley's behalf. Is that going to be enough for her? We'll see. But certainly, you talk to veterans of this, you talk to voters who've shown up, and they say, Trump gets it now. He didn't get it back in 2016. He's built the operation he needs to make the calls and find hundreds of voters and hope that at least dozens of them show up at a caucus. DeSantis has done that, and that's what gives him the confidence, and that's why he continues to say, I'm going to do better than you think. Haley's the big unknown because she came in here later and she didn't spend as much time building that organization. We'll see. And the weather will be a factor, Caitlin. It's freezing, it's windy, there will be snow, and that will keep people away.
I was going to say, and that's why we find you inside, but you may be pulled into extreme weather coverage if you haven't already. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for braving the elements for us, and we will talk to you soon. Stay safe and warm.
Former President Donald Trump plans to reach out to Iowa voters tonight while his two closest Republican rivals appear in a debate that Trump once again decided to skip. A new poll shows one challenger gaining ground in another key state, though. Our Ed O'Keefe is following the candidates in the final stretch before Monday's Iowa caucuses.
Good evening.
On television, I'm the candidate who's most in tune with the values here of Iowa Republicans. And I think if you're a conservative, I'm your guy.
And driving through the snow to be on the stump.
Don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't play in this caucus. It matters.
Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are now in Iowa for the final 5 days.
Governor, how are you preparing for the debate tomorrow night?
And are set to face off in a one-on-one debate tonight. While DeSantis and Haley look to be vying for second in Iowa, a new poll shows Haley has cut former President Donald Trump's lead in New Hampshire down to just single digits.
The only way we're going to win the majority of Americans is if we go forward with a new generational leader that leaves the negativity and the baggage in the past.
That argument resonates with first-time Iowa caucus voter Lauren Vanderreed.
A conservative female president is something that I think America could use right about now.
Bob Rawlings voted for Trump in 2020, but says he's leaning to supporting either Haley or DeSantis, and will be closely watching the debate tonight.
To me, they're pretty even. That's why I'm undecided. I think with me, obviously, one of the issues is border security and the lack of good policy towards that. So I want to hear what they both have to say about plans for border security.
The plunging temperatures, the wintry mix, all of it is a big concern now, Anne-Marie, in the coming days. We checked again this morning. Currently, the high on Monday is -19. Ask yourself, is there something you would leave your house for on a Monday night if the temperatures are that low? I think a lot of Iowans will be asking themselves that question in the coming days. But those numbers out of New Hampshire, putting Haley now single digits behind former President Donald Trump, have him concerned. He's unleashing a new round of attack ads on her on television, making baseless claims online. And it's all something he's likely to bring up tonight in his own town hall while Haley and Governor Ron DeSantis are debating on another channel.
Yeah, well, if you're asking me, the question is pretty much, the answer is pretty much nothing. But these are Iowans. They're used to this sort of weather, I thought. Let us talk about this, though, this debate tonight, right? So if they don't want to go out in the freezing temperatures, it's okay, because tonight they can watch at least and get an idea of who they think is worth their vote, and then decide if they want to go out. What are you going to be looking for when you watch this debate?
Can either of these two that are going head-to-head really try to separate themselves from the other in terms of policy? Because there are a lot of voters here listening for that, especially on the issues of border security and the future of immigration policy in this country. And do either of them decide in this setting to, if not only attack each other, perhaps go a little more aggressively at former President Trump? And I think it's a good opportunity also to see the ways that currently these two talk about him. Haley and DeSantis making similar arguments that the party can't afford to have him be the nominee this year and expect to win not only the presidency, but hold on to Congress and hold on to governorships across the country. But does either of them make it more personal or raise concerns about what's going on in Washington and New York this week specifically with his court dates? If they do, that's a little different, but it is potentially to the detriment of their fortunes here if you're trying to still pick away people who maybe are deciding between them and the former president.
Yeah, I think this has potential.
It's a tricky balancing act.
It is. It has the potential to be either the most interesting debate we've seen so far or the most boring, depending on the approach that they want to take. Ed, thanks a lot.
We begin here with a shrinking Republican field in the race for president. Christie announced Wednesday he is ending his White House bid.
It's clear to me tonight that there isn't a path for me to win the nomination, which is why I'm suspending my campaign tonight.
Christie went on to criticize the character and decision-making of GOP frontrunner Donald Trump. His departure comes as the remaining candidates appeal to voters ahead of the Iowa caucuses. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. Ed, why is this happening now? What was the state of Christie's campaign leading up to this?
Well, Jeff, he had been reluctant to make this move and had said even as earlier as yesterday that he had no intention of leaving the race and endorsing somebody else if they're not being as forcefully critical of former President Trump. But ultimately, he concluded what polling has begun to show, which is that while he may have found favor early on, he is fading towards the back of the pack in New Hampshire, holding about 12% support in a poll out earlier this week that puts Nikki Haley just single digits behind Donald Trump, suggesting that the mix of Republican and independent voters that can vote in New Hampshire's primary could potentially put her neck and neck, if not ahead of the former president, before that state's primary later this month. Christie was not at all a factor, however, here in Iowa. There were limitations to his campaign and to his appeal across the Republican Party, given he was so critical of the former president.
Ed, something that's getting a lot of attention today is Christie was caught on hot mic before this announcement. He said Nikki Haley is not ready for this moment. He said DeSantis is petrified. He railed against how much money they've spent, both around $60 million. He's only spent 12. It honestly sounds a lot like the message that he wanted to get out even beforehand, even if it was a hot mic moment. Tell me if I'm wrong about that. But what's the significance of this?
No, he was telling it like he has, like it is, in essence, forecasting what he fears is going to happen next, which is that Ron DeSantis can't do it, Nikki Haley can't necessarily do it, but by maybe getting out, that frees up the 12% in New Hampshire or the smaller percentages in other states that were thinking about him to at least go look at the others and try, as they were doing through Christie, to stop Trump. The DeSantis campaign confirms to CBS News tonight that indeed the governor of Florida and the former governor of New Jersey did speak this afternoon before Christie made that announcement. They would not confirm, however, that the Florida governor seemed petrified on the phone.
Ed, you're in Iowa ahead of the caucuses. Other than it being 20 below zero there in a couple days, and I'm not overestimating that, I don't think. It's going to be really bad, really snowy. Really windy. What are you hearing from undecided voters? You talked about how Haley seems to be closing the gap according to the latest polls.
Yeah, well, she's closed them significantly in New Hampshire. Here in Iowa, it's a little different because she, like Christie, was spending more time in New England. than out here in the heartland. It's Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis's caucus to lose next Monday night. Nobody disputes the idea that the former president's probably going to come out on top. The question would be by how much? Is it the 30 to 40% that some polls suggest? Probably not. But is it double digits? Does DeSantis get within single digits? That is possible because he, like Trump, has been organizing on the ground here in the county by county, precinct by precinct way you have to for these tiny caucuses that happen all over the state and then report up one final number. Haley is hoping that the momentum she's seeing across the country and in New Hampshire especially might appeal to those last-minute undecided voters who don't want Trump renominated and are concerned, as she says, that he could create too much chaos. But she doesn't have that kind of field operation the other two guys have, which is why many believe she's fighting for a close third or somehow might be able to surpass DeSantis here in the closing days. Plenty of time to go. And yes, the temperatures will be in the negative double digits with the wind chill. One Iowan today told me, it'll be -2. Not that bad.
No, I mean, it's going to be downright dangerous outside, and we'll see how much it impacts the vote. We know you're going to be there. We know you're going to continue your great reporting. Try to stay warm. Ed, thank you very much.
Former President Donald Trump was in court today for the closing arguments in his New York civil fraud trial. The case alleges the former president and his adult sons manipulated the value of his properties to win better financing terms. New York State Attorney General Letitia James is seeking $370 million in damages and is also looking to revoke his business license in the state. Trump has denied the allegations. On Wednesday, the judge said that the former president would not be allowed to speak during closing arguments, but Trump then did, in fact, address the court today before they broke for lunch. He spoke to the press as well as the court took a lunch break.
This was a political witch hunt for election interference, but also for getting somebody elected because you wanted to get the publicity. It's a disgrace, and they should pay me damages. That's the way it should be. They should be paying me damages. This is a disgraceful situation.
CBS News campaign reporter Katrina Kaufman joins us now from the courthouse. Katrina, so you told us you're there. You saw the president, in fact, speaking before the court after being told earlier that he wasn't going to be allowed to. What did he have to say?
So it was an interesting scene. Yesterday, Trump's team wouldn't agree to Judge Engoron's terms to let him talk. But after all the lawyers had finished their closing arguments, Christopher Keyes, Trump's attorney, asked if Trump could speak for 2 or 3 minutes. And the judge said that he would allow him to, but only if he could stick to the law and the facts. And he asked Trump if he could do that. And in response, Trump just began giving a speech. He said that he didn't think that this was about facts. He at one point called it a political witch hunt, and I think there was an audible sigh from the judge at that point. He said it was election interference, that he never had any problem before he ran for office. He's being run out of business in New York, and he really just took this moment to run with his words and take his chance to speak his mind in court, even though he really wasn't supposed to speak about these things.
So, Katrina, it was interesting hearing your transcript of what the president had to say before the judge, especially given the parameters that the judge tried to put around it, at point calling it a business death penalty, talking about the judge's legacy. How did the judge receive those remarks?
I mean, I feel like Judge Engoron always kind of receives these things with a little bit of comedy and a sigh. I'd say throughout the closing arguments, he just kind of looked on sort of expressionless. I think it's already been clear that he's not moved by a lot of these arguments. At the end of the testimony, Trump's team had tried to get a directed verdict, and Engoron denied it. I think it was about the 6th time he had done so. And he also just questioned the credibility of someone that Trump's team views as their star witness, this NYU professor, Eli Bartov. And also Christopher Keyes mentioned Bartov a number of times during his closing arguments today. And I was watching Trump, and each time Trump would sort of perk up because this guy just gave him the most compliments about his financial statements, their level of detail, how great they were. And Trump really views him as key to proving his case. But the judge does not seem convinced by this at all.
And the judge actually made a point about how much this expert in finances was paid by the Trump team, right?
Yep, I wrote an article about this at the time. He was paid almost $900,000, maybe even more by the end of the trial. So in the denial, Engoron actually said that this just shows if you pay someone $1 million, they'll say anything.
So it doesn't sound like these remarks, which were originally denied, but then proceeded anyway, necessarily helped him win over the judge who ultimately is going to make this decision. So what are the next steps in the hearing?
So the next steps are, we'll actually, after the lunch break, we'll hear the state's closing arguments. Right now, Trump has gone off to give a news conference, so I don't know that he'll be back for that. And then we're expecting a ruling in a few weeks. And I'll also just add that after Trump, gave his talk, the judge said to his lawyer, this could have really been done differently. You could have had more time if they had agreed to his terms. Yesterday, they could have really carved out a moment for Trump to speak, but I think Trump just kind of wanted to say whatever he wanted.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, thanks for bringing us the latest.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to America Decides. Donald Trump is the presumed frontrunner in the Iowa caucuses. The rest of the GOP field has just 4 days to close the gap. We're down to 5 Republican candidates vying for the nomination after Christie dropped out yesterday. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. Ed, I think I took for granted how often I see you because it feels like it's been forever. You've been in Iowa now for weeks and talking to voters. So tell me, what are they saying is their top issue as they head into the election day? Caucus day, I should say. Sorry.
We should get to see you yes, caucus day. Let's not forget. They do it a little differently out here. Good to see you, if only through a toolbox. But, we have spent most of our time here hearing or putting an emphasis on hearing from these voters who play such an outsized role in beginning the 2024 campaign. Among the top issues for Republican voters especially has been, what is the future of border security? What does the future of immigration into the United States look like? Voters talk about it, so do the candidates. Take a listen.
They pointed out that we're 1,000 miles from the border. Like, why does that matter to us in Iowa? I'm like, are you kidding? These people are infiltrating everywhere.
The immigration situation needs to be shut down. The borders need to be closed.
Of course, the reality of what the immigration situation is here, at least in Iowa, is a little different than as described by some who we've heard from. And we heard from somebody who's lived in this state for nearly 30 years. Her name is Brenda Rodriguez. Came to Iowa, came to the United States, like I said, about 30 years ago, and explained to us why that is and why she chose to live in Iowa. But as an immigrant, how the conversation that she's been hearing from Republican candidates, from fellow Iowans who are participating in the caucuses, has affected her and other immigrants like her. We also talked to a guy named Joe Enrique Henry, who's a longtime immigrant rights activist, about this. So take a listen.
We did it so many years being under the shadows, and I'm done, I had tried my best ways to go through the legal process, but it's no way. They don't leave any way for us.
So when you hear these candidates who are running in your state talk about immigration and say that people who've come illegally have to go home to wherever they're from, what do you think of that?
I came running from the father of my daughters because I was scared of he killed me. I have worked a lot in this country. I think I haven't done anything wrong. I think I deserve a chance to stay. If I'm paying my taxes and I'm not doing anything, I don't think I'm a bad person that the people from Iowa don't want me here.
Iowans, especially here, would have a very difficult time having anything to eat at dinner time without immigrants, because immigrants are the ones who process the meat, who farm the fields, who cook the food, serve the food. A lot of Iowans would starve without immigrants taking care of all those necessary things to help feed those families.
So, Weezer, that gives you some sense of how those that maybe aren't as actively involved, but certainly who live and work here, hear
the conversation about that issue, and then are living their own reality, so to speak.
Of course, there are so many other issues, Ed, that we heard about last night when Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis faced off in the final debate before the Iowa caucuses. They're crisscrossing the state, trying to get, last-minute voters. Are they making any impact, or is this still mostly the Trump show in the Hawkeye state?
We have met nobody in this state, Leisha, who disputes the idea that the former president is ahead. But certainly Ron DeSantis's operation is confident they have built out the kind of precinct by precinct, county by county campaign that is necessary to win in the very surgical way that the Iowa caucuses are conducted. Nikki Haley's team is here. It was notable that she is here for the duration. There's no plan to go back to New Hampshire, for example, where she's suddenly cutting into the former president's lead, if you believe a recent poll. They're not as well organized at that sort of very grassroots level as much as the Trump and the DeSantis operations are. But they seem confident that some of the enthusiasm and maybe late deciders who've been trying to decide between Governor DeSantis and others might break her way. He's here tonight in Ames at a barbecue joint that has this great back room that we're in that's been used by candidates of both parties for several years to reach people in this community to the north of Des Moines. And you're going to see this really traditional retail campaigning across the state through Sunday night into even Monday morning, depending on the campaigns. Whether it's DeSantis, the former president will be here at various points over the weekend. He's been relying on some of his surrogates, former Trump cabinet secretaries, members of his family are here tonight in the state. And then Nikki Haley has her two children who are in their 20s campaigning with her this weekend as well.
Well, Ed, this mom who is concerned about seeing you on TV almost 24 hours a day hopes you eat, if not barbecue, something. I want to talk about Chris Christie because he dropped out of the presidential race last night, as you know. And I wonder if that's going to make any campaigns because there are 5 remaining candidates vying for the GOP nomination. Is Christie's absence going to help anybody?
Not here in Iowa. He's been a complete non-factor. Never organized, did not visit, certainly over the last several months as he was so laser focused on campaigning in New Hampshire and spending time in New York and Washington television studios trying to take advantage of free earned media. So it really is down to these 5 as you see them on screen, and arguably more so the first 3 there, Trump, DeSantis, and Haley. The big question is what happens to his support up in New Hampshire, where looking at surveys that were released in the last 2 weeks, you could see sort of, okay, if he's your first choice, who's your second choice? Most of the data suggests that most of his support does have the potential to transfer over to Governor Haley, Ambassador Haley. But we've also heard in the last 24 hours, or we've been reminded of the real bad blood between these 2 rival camps and his concerns that she doesn't have what it takes potentially to take on the former president and at least beat him in New Hampshire, if not defeat him outright.
Yes, Ed, that was made very clear. As always, thank you for joining us and for all of your reporting.
And there are only 3 more days to go until the Iowa caucuses. The cold and snowy weather is not slowing down the Republican presidential primary candidates as they make their final push to persuade voters. Ed O'Keefe is in Des Moines, where he's been talking to voters and the campaigns all week. Ed, what have you been hearing?
That the cold won't necessarily deter people, Anne-Marie. We'll see about that because this is going to be a record low on Monday. And the campaigns are now adapting their final day strategies. Already one candidate has had to cancel some events. We'll get into that in a moment. But another contender is raising fresh concerns about what former President Donald Trump's legal troubles could mean for the rest of the Republican Party.
I got more reinforcements with layers of clothes on the way.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he's not concerned about the weather Monday for the Iowa caucuses, but he is concerned about frontrunner Donald Trump with his legal troubles and promises to go from courtroom to courtroom.
you must have a thought on whether or not that's a good idea.
I want to focus on what can we do so that hardworking people can get ahead again instead of falling behind. None of that will happen in this election if Trump is the nominee. Iowans have a chance to weigh in on this.
DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley are scheduled to crisscross the state through the weekend, trying to win over the last remaining undecided Republicans.
You set the tone for the country. It's a pretty cool thing.
Haley is drawing larger crowds intrigued by a series of polls suggesting she'd defeat President Biden if she's the nominee.
Do you know what that means? That's bigger than the presidency. That's governorships, that's House, that's Senate, that's all the way down to the school board.
With fresh data showing inflation creeped up last month, the voters are most concerned with rising prices.
I'm in shock. I just told my husband the other day, do you know how much that orange juice cost? I mean, I am seeing it, and I'm not liking it. And it does change my buying a little bit.
And with immigration.
Our country is immigrants, and I think we need to welcome them. We need them, that's who we are, but not in a chaotic way that we're doing it now.
One big unknown, since Republicans can only vote during caucuses at 7 p.m. Monday night, how will the record low temperatures affect turnout?
I don't think the weather's going to be that bad. You know, I'm here at -2, maybe a little colder.
-2 may be optimistic. That guy's no meteorologist. He was a nice guy, and he's definitely optimistic. We'll see. Already, there is a snowstorm crossing the Hawkeye State right now, Anne-Marie, going to affect the roads and the temperatures here throughout the day. So the Nikki Haley campaign has canceled 3 in-person events across the state. Instead, she plans to meet with supporters over the telephone and hold a series of town hall meetings that way. All the candidates now hoping to find those last-minute undecided voters. They're going to have to go indoors to find them.
Yeah, that's not going to be good. Let me ask you about the former president, how caucus goers are feeling about him. He was not there yesterday. Instead, he was in court. He was told not to speak, but he still had plenty to say because it's clear that his court appearances are not just about, defending himself. He sort of folded those appearances into his campaign strategy. How do caucus goers feel about this?
They say go for it. There's a reason he remains in the lead here, and it's because the support he enjoys among Iowa's most conservative, some would call them MAGA-style Republicans, is sustained and only grows when they see him doing these kinds of things. He's not doing this for the sheer entertainment of it or to spend his time that way. He's doing it because he has the proof, and we've seen it here, that the more he does this and exploits this legal mess that he's in and tries to pin it on his opponents, even though it has nothing to do with partisan politics, the more it helps him. We'll see if that works. He's sent his children here. He's had other supporters come to the state. Many of them had to cancel this week coming from out of state because of the weather, and we'll see if they can show up this weekend. He is scheduled to be here Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and we'll see if anyone shows up for his rallies given the weather.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.